New York City, May 25, 1979. A 6-year-old boy named Etan Patz begs his parents for one thing: to walk the 2 blocks to his school bus stop alone. Just this once, like a big kid. His mother says yes. It's the first time he's ever made that walk without an adult beside him. It's also the last time anyone can say for certain where he was. He never boards the bus. He never makes it to school. And when his mother goes looking for him that afternoon, Etan Patz has vanished so completely that, more than 4 decades later, his body has never been found. What happened in those 2 blocks would trigger one of the largest manhunts in New York City history, put his face on the first ever missing child milk carton campaign, and haunt investigators for over 40 years. 2 men would eventually be tied to the case. One a drifter with a documented history of molesting boys who was never charged. The other a convenience store clerk whose confession would send him to prison, only for a federal appeals court to rule, decades later, that his conviction may not survive. Is Etan Patz's real killer sitting in a cell right now? Or is he still out there, having let another man take the fall? This is Vanishpointmedia. To understand what New York lost on May 25, 1979, you have to understand the world Etan Patz was born into. He came into the world on October 9, 1972, in Manhattan, in a neighborhood shaped by Soho's restless artistic energy. His parents, Stanley and Julie Patz, had bought a spacious 3rd-floor loft that same year, before Soho's later transformation into a fashion and retail hub. Back then, the neighborhood was still shedding its old identity as a garment and printing district, and a wave of artists, bohemians, and young families were moving into the cast-iron buildings the manufacturers left behind. The Patzes were part of that wave. Stanley was a professional photographer, and he spent years photographing his children, images that would later take on a haunting second life in the search for his son. Julie ran a home daycare out of the loft, which meant the apartment at 113 Prince Street was rarely quiet, full of other people's children, creativity, and the particular chaos of a working family making a life in a neighborhood still finding its footing. Etan had an older sister, Shira, 8, and a younger brother, Ari, just 2 years old. By every account, it was a loving, unremarkable childhood, the kind that makes what happened next even harder to sit with. By the spring of 1979, Etan was 6 years old and pushing, the way 6-year-olds do, for a little more independence. He wanted to walk to his school bus stop alone, the way the other kids on his block already did. It was only 2 blocks from home. He wore his favorite black cap, styled like an airline captain's hat, over hair that was still growing out. He had a single dollar in his pocket, enough for a soda. He promised his mother, "It's fine, Mom. I can do it." Julie said yes. The Soho of 1979 wasn't the luxury shopping district it is today. No Apple flagship, no Ralph Lauren storefront on Prince Street. It was gritty, semi-industrial, the kind of place where a 6-year-old walking 2 blocks alone didn't register as a risk. That's the detail that makes this case so difficult to file away as a cautionary tale about the era. It wasn't reckless parenting. It was 2 blocks in daylight in a neighborhood full of people who knew the family. And it still wasn't enough. That afternoon, when Etan didn't come home on the bus, Julie called the school and learned he'd never arrived that morning. She called the parents of the other kids who rode his bus. None of them had seen him board. She called the police. Then she called Stanley at work. Within hours, what had been an ordinary Friday afternoon in Soho became something else entirely. Hundreds of police officers fanned out through the neighborhood. Bloodhounds were brought in from outside the city. The man everyone had been hunting wasn't a stranger from the park. He'd worked at a bodega just down the block from the Patz home, the same route Etan walked that morning. For 33 years, the answer had allegedly been standing behind a convenience store counter, 2 blocks from where a family never stopped waiting. Pedro Hernandez was 18 years old in 1979, working at that bodega just off the route Etan would have walked to his bus stop. Investigators would later come to believe that on his way to school that morning, Etan stopped there for a drink and never left. For 33 years, that detail sat buried. Hernandez had briefly surfaced as a person of interest decades earlier, then slipped out of focus entirely while investigators built their case around Jose Ramos. It wasn't until 2012, working from a fresh tip, that detectives found him again. This time in Camden, New Jersey, far from the Soho Street corner where the case began. He confessed to police that he had lured Etan into the basement of the store where he worked. Prosecutors say he then choked the boy, stuffed his body into a plastic garbage bag hidden inside a box, and simply carried it out with the store's trash the way he would have any other night. A confession like that should have closed the case. It didn't, not cleanly and not quickly. The legal fight that followed would stretch on for over a decade, longer than the investigation that found him in the first place. Hernandez's first trial, in 2015, ended with a hung jury. The panel simply couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. Prosecutors tried again in 2017, and this time a jury convicted him of second-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. It looked finally like an ending, but buried inside that 2017 verdict was a legal question that would come back to unmake it. During deliberations, jurors sent the judge a note. If they decided Hernandez's very first confession, given before he'd been read his Miranda rights, wasn't voluntary, did that mean they also had to throw out his later confessions, the ones recorded on video, the ones he made to his own family, the ones he made to doctors? The judge told them simply, no. Hernandez's defense argued that answer was wrong, that the jury should have been told it could discount all the confessions if it doubted the first one, not just the initial statement. An appeals panel agreed with the defense. In July 2025, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the conviction entirely, ruling that the trial judge's instruction had been clearly wrong and manifestly prejudicial. The ruling meant Hernandez had to either be given a new trial or released from custody outright, reopening one of the city's most notorious slangs. Manhattan prosecutors weren't willing to let it end there. District Attorney Alvin Bragg called the basis for the reversal a slender reed, a technical jury instruction dispute overturning a 5-month trial that had included 66 witnesses. Rather than simply proceeding to a third trial, prosecutors took the unusual step of asking the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene directly and reinstate the 2017 conviction before a retrial could even begin. The clock was already running. Under the federal court's ruling, jury selection for a third trial had to start by June 1, 2026, or Hernandez, by then 64 years old and still serving his original sentence, would have to be released. The Supreme Court moved fast. On June 22, 2026, the justices ruled 6-3 to grant prosecutors' appeal, reversing the Second Circuit and reinstating Hernandez's conviction outright. The majority found that no clearly established federal law had actually required the trial judge to instruct the jury the way the appeals panel believed, meaning the lower court had overstepped the narrow authority federal courts have to second-guess state trials. The 3 liberal justices on the bench dissented. So the case that once seemed headed for a third trial and possibly Hernandez's release ended, at least for now, back where the 2017 jury left it. Guilty, sentenced to 25 years to life, the conviction. Here's the part that makes it almost unbearable. None of it brought Etan home. Every alert system, every piece of legislation, every dairy carton with his photo on it, was built in the absence of an answer, infrastructure raised around an open wound that, even with a conviction on the books, has never actually closed. His body has never been found. There has never been a funeral. A boy who never got to finish walking 2 blocks became, without ever choosing to, one of the reasons an entire nation started looking a little closer at the ones who did. For 47 years, Stan and Julie Patz lived in the same third-floor loft on Prince Street. Even after Etan was declared legally dead in 2001, they stayed. For decades they never changed their phone number, never moved, holding on to the small, aching possibility that if their son ever tried to find his way home, he'd know exactly where to look. They didn't put their lives on hold to do it. They raised their other 2 children, Shira and Ari, into adulthood inside that same apartment, not as a shrine to what was lost, but as an ordinary home that happened to carry an extraordinary weight. Julie and Stan also helped co-found the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, turning their own unresolved grief into the infrastructure that would go on to help other families whose children vanished. Whatever anyone believes about how they should have grieved, this much is documented. They built something out of it that outlived their own loss. It wasn't until Pedro Hernandez's 2017 conviction that the Patzes finally left. They sold the Prince Street loft in June 2019 for $3.75 million and relocated to Hawaii, where Ari had already settled. After nearly 4 decades of staying put specifically so their son could find them, a conviction, however contested it would later become, was what finally let them go. They sat through every day of that 2017 trial. They listened to the recordings of Hernandez describing what he says happened, putting a 6-year-old boy's body in a box and leaving it out with the store's trash. And by every account, they believed him. That belief would be tested again and again in the years that followed, through a federal appeals court overturning the verdict, through the Manhattan DA fighting to reinstate it, through the specter of a third trial that could have ended in Hernandez walking free. When the Supreme Court finally reinstated the conviction in June 2026, prosecutors had been openly preparing for that third trial to begin that same month, meaning the reversal arrived just as the case was about to be dragged, once more through open court. What's easy to lose across 47 years of investigations, milk cartons, mistrials, and Supreme Court opinions is the plainest fact of all. A 6-year-old boy asked his mother for one small piece of independence on an ordinary Friday morning, and he never came home. To this day, his remains have never been recovered. There has been no burial, no place, beyond a courtroom docket, where his name and the word closure sit together with any real confidence. Somewhere between a bodega on Prince Street and a Supreme Court opinion handed down 47 years later, the case of Etan Patz became something bigger than one missing boy, a turning point in how an entire country searches for its children. But for the 2 parents who once watched him walk away from a 3rd-floor window, it was never really about the movement, the milk cartons, or the legal precedent. It was about a boy who promised, "It's fine, Mom, I can do it," and never got the chance to prove himself right.